FlatOut 2 was a very successful game. So successful in fact that Bugbear made a remake of this game 1 year later. Or 2 years later if you're on PC. FlatOut Ultimate Carnage. FlatOut Ultimate Carnage was just as successful as FlatOut 2. Yet despite that, a lot of people in the FlatOut fan base says that FlatOut 2 is way better than FlatOut Ultimate Carnage. Why is that? And since so many people in the FlatOut fanbase are really vocal about this opinion, it really made me wonder, is FlatOut 2 better than FlatOut Ultimate Carnage? That's what we're going to find out in this analysis video. Hi everyone, as always Patrick here. If you're already subscribed, make sure you turn on notifications, otherwise YouTube won't tell you if I posted anything. If you are new to the channel, make sure you watch until the very end and consider subscribing if you like it. Okay, FlatOut Ultimate Carnage. Just like the previous two games, FlatOut Ultimate Carnage was developed by Bugbear Entertainment and published by Empire Interactive, at least in Europe, in 2007. Or 2008 if you're on PC. What you're seeing right now is the PC version. If you've watched my analysis videos about FlatOut 1 and FlatOut 2, you already know how this video is gonna go. So let's not waste any more time and let's start the analysis. The graphics. FlatOut Ultimate Carnage is a remake of FlatOut 2, as I've said before. So you're probably expecting FlatOut Ultimate Carnage to look pretty similar to FlatOut 2. And you would be right, except for the fact that FlatOut Ultimate Carnage looks so much better than FlatOut 2. Better textures, better draw distance, better aesthetics, better vibe, and so on and so forth. The HUD and the menus are cleaner and the navigation is also much easier. All of this makes the game more visually appealing. Not only that, Bugbear didn't mess around and also fixed many graphical problems that I had with the game. In my FlatOut 2 video, I've complained about 3 things when it comes to the graphics. 1. The game was too yellow because FlatOut 2 had a yellow filter. 2. The bloom in FlatOut 2 was horrible. And 3. The motion blur in FlatOut 2 was very bad. But FlatOut Ultimate Carnage fixes everything. Well, almost everything. The yellow filter is now removed in FlatOut Ultimate Carnage. And not only that, the color palette is so much better. The game looks way more colorful than FlatOut 2. And color is something that I really appreciate in racing games. The color palette also makes the game feel more alive. Again, something I really appreciate. The bloom is now removed in Ultimate Carnage, or at least it's toned down so it's not as obnoxious. Because of this, now you can actually stare at the screen for more than 15 minutes. Sadly, the motion blur is still bad in Ultimate Carnage. Not as bad as it was in FlatOut 2, but it's still bad. At least the motion blur in Ultimate Carnage doesn't blur the entire screen, just the sides. Sadly, you can't turn it off. What a shame. But the point is, FlatOut Ultimate Carnage looks way better than FlatOut 2. To prove my point, let's compare the graphics of FlatOut Ultimate Carnage to other racing games, or at least some of the other racing games that also came out in 2007. Car Arena, Sega Rally Revo, Italian Championship, and of course the big one, Colin McRae Dirt. Let's do the same thing for 2008 because the PC version came out in 2008. Superstar Racing, not the one by Milestone by the way, Score International Baja 1000, iRacing, and of course Trackmania United Forever. FlatOut Ultimate Carnage is easily one of the better looking racing games from 2007. From 2008, not so much, but it still looks decent. Oh, and of course it looks better than previous FlatOut games. Can I say the same thing about the graphical options? Let's see. FlatOut 2 supports widescreen resolutions, but those resolutions are stretched. FlatOut Ultimate Carnage doesn't have this problem. In fact, FlatOut Ultimate Carnage supports those widescreen resolutions perfectly. FlatOut Ultimate Carnage can also run in 4K, something that FlatOut 2 cannot do, unless you use a fan-made patch. The FOV in FlatOut 2 was very bad, and you had to use a fan-made patch to fix it. Changing the FOV in FlatOut Ultimate Carnage? Optional. Every resolution in FlatOut Ultimate Carnage has fixed FOV, and every FOV value is correct for every single resolution. Amazing! Anti-aliasing and anisotropic filtering is the same in both games, so let's move on. Unfortunately, FlatOut Ultimate Carnage shares some of the same graphical problems with FlatOut 2. The frame rate is still capped at 100 FPS, the VSync is still forced on with no way to turn it off, and although I did say that anisotropic filtering works the same as in FlatOut 2, it's actually broken in Ultimate Carnage. Broken as in it doesn't filter scenery. Thankfully, there is a workaround for those problems. All you have to do is use the Zolika strainer. Unfortunately, it didn't work for me for some reason. I have no idea why, but I'm pretty sure I'll figure it out in the meantime, I guess. The stability. FlatOut 2 didn't crash, didn't stutter, didn't lag, and worked as intended. The same goes for FlatOut Ultimate Carnage, but it actually crashed on me once because I alt-tapped. Yes, the game crashes when you alt-tap. Really unfortunate. Thanks Bugbear, that shouldn't happen. Now let's talk about the story. The story in FlatOut Ultimate Carnage is exactly the same as it was in FlatOut 2. As in, there's no story, so let's not waste any more time and let's talk about the gameplay, because the gameplay is where the real fun begins. This time I'm going to analyze the gameplay differently. This time I will be comparing FlatOut 2 and FlatOut Ultimate Carnage. Well, as the title suggests, so let's do this. The damage model. The damage model in FlatOut 2 was really good, but FlatOut Ultimate Carnage does this even better. In FlatOut Ultimate Carnage, the damage model is much more noticeable, better dents, better scratches, more importantly, more dents and more scratches, better particle effects when hitting stuff, better rollovers, more parts are flying off. In other words, FlatOut Ultimate Carnage does the damage model better. The physics. The physics in FlatOut 2 were kinda weird, if I'm being honest. The cars in FlatOut 2 both had weight and didn't have weight at the same time. In hindsight, the cars in FlatOut 2 were extremely easy to drive, and you could plow through every object without a care in the world. But in FlatOut Ultimate Carnage, that's a completely different story. The physics in FlatOut Ultimate Carnage are a mix of FlatOut 1's physics and FlatOut 2's physics. But what does that mean? Well, I'm going to talk about that in the handling section. Oh, would you look at that? Now it's time for the handling section. The cars now have weight to them. Now they feel heavy and they also have a decent amount of downforce. They are also a bit harder to drive and more likely to spin out. Hitting objects and props with your car now at best slows you down, at worst messes you up. Now you're probably thinking, hey, this is FlatOut 1 all over again. And to that I say, not quite. I'll explain. In FlatOut 2, turns had no sense of speed, but thanks to those changes added in FlatOut Ultimate Carnage, turns now do have sense of speed, which is great. The fact that the cars are now harder to drive and easier to spin out means you have to be really careful when driving. Sure, you can still destroy stuff on your way, but like I've said before, the objects and props can now either slow you down or mess you up. However, it's not the exact same as it was in FlatOut 1. Because while the objects and props do slow you down, they don't slow you down that much compared to FlatOut 1. In fact, some objects don't slow you down at all. And even if you flip and roll over, you will still quickly recover. So, what's the problem? Not to mention, the car damage doesn't affect the car's performance. So again, what's the problem? Now let's compare the tracks and the cars. Let's start with the tracks. I mean, FlatOut Ultimate Carnage is a remake of FlatOut 2. Yeah, if you've played FlatOut 2, you already know what to expect. But there is one difference, at least in the career mode. The stunt events are now replaced with new tracks, and those new tracks are okay. Not much to say here. Now let's compare the cars. Again, FlatOut Ultimate Carnage is a remake of FlatOut 2, but there are some differences. Some. They look different, and by different I mean better. They are still split into the Derby, Race and Street classes, and FlatOut Ultimate Carnage adds 2 new cars, and they're okay. But what about the car behavior? Well, I've already talked about it before, so go back to the 10th minute of the video. I've explained everything there. Okay, I think now we can answer the question. Is FlatOut 2 better than FlatOut Ultimate Carnage? No, it's not. FlatOut Ultimate Carnage is better. FlatOut Ultimate Carnage contains more content, cleaner visuals, and more carnage. AKA, FlatOut Ultimate Carnage is better than FlatOut 2 in every single way. Go play FlatOut Ultimate Carnage. Next up, well, you already know what's coming up next. I'll see you there.